All right, welcome back, guys. It's Detroit Gamesters, Shamir and Arjun back at it again. So, a lot of exciting things to start off the new year with. I hope you guys have all been good. Hope you guys enjoyed your holidays. And yeah, January has not disappointed, at least when it comes to me. So, big things to talk about with Nintendo, with Microsoft, even with Sony to a certain extent. So, why don't we get started? Arjun, in the last month, I know we've been having a lot of exciting news come out, a lot of things to look forward to. What has been, kind of catching your attention the most?
Yeah, for sure. You kind of already mentioned some of it, but I think the big three players out in the gaming industry, Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation, I kind of want to start with Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch 2 reveal, there's been so many leaks leading up to it. I think we talked about it in episode 1 or 2. They finally unveiled this thing, I believe January 16th. There were so many rumors that a direct was going to happen, but really it was just like a shadow drop of a trailer, which I'm not super surprised about. But interestingly enough, it kind of looks the same, but it still has me hyped for some reason. Showed off a new Mario Kart. And honestly, like the trailer itself was really interesting too. It makes the new Switch look like a Steam Deck in a sense. And it was done really well, It was just like a really nice, like CG graphic, like pre-rendered thing with no one really touching the Switch console itself. Unlike the original Switch unveil, where it was people on a rooftop, people playing on a couch to kind of demonstrate the actual system. And I think it was kind of smart of Nintendo to just tack on a 2 at the end of that, so there's no confusion anymore. When going from the Wii to the Wii U, this is a brand new thing. But it's unfortunate that we now have to wait 2.5 months for a full Nintendo Direct to see really what the system is capable of. There was a little teaser in that trailer showing the Joy-Cons kind of being used as mice. So that's going to be really interesting. You have a USB-C port now at the top. And overall, you have this interesting color combination on the Switch where you have this highlighted orange or red and blue on the sides of the Joy-Cons and in between the analog sticks. So overall, I'm kind of excited. I really want to get your thoughts, Shamir, too. But this is one of the most viewed YouTube videos for a unveiling of a console, more than the PS5 now. So it's at, I think, 23 million. So it's pretty interesting. People are really excited for this.
Yeah, yeah. Just piggybacking off of what you're saying, I have to agree with most of that. I think one of the things that surprised me was exactly what time they announced it and how we do have to wait for a while to see more about the games and things like that. And a part of me almost wonders if that's because so much has gotten leaked. And even in our last podcast, I mean, you're a lot better at catching up on these leaks than me, but I would say almost everything we were anticipating ended up being in the actual product, right? I know we haven't had full confirmation about the optical sensors, but it's really seems that way already. And I guess one of the things I really have to give my hats off to with Nintendo is their marketing team. If you really think about it, they didn't give us a lot of direct information on the Switch 2. They didn't release a bunch of games or things like that, or announce a bunch of games with the Switch 2 trailer. But there was enough there that it kept us like really curious. It satiated our desires and everything. Even like the playfulness of the Joy Cons, going around like a mouse. I remember when I first saw that, I was like, okay, this is a waste of time. Like, why are they spending like 10 seconds on this? And only later occurred to me when I was watching videos, I was like, oh my God, they're probably teasing the fact that this is the new functionality for the Switch. So it's kind of playful. That's totally Nintendo's MO. That's totally how they do that. So super high quality across the board. I guess I gotta ask, you were more plugged into this than me, with the leaks, and I know it's probably fair to say that you're more of a Nintendo fanboy than me
Yeah,
because
totally.
I hopped on the train on the Wii U, which is probably shocking for anyone to hear. So do you feel like this came in where you expected? This was above your expectations, below your expectations, or still too early to tell?
I would say this is for now, it's on par with what I expected them to unveil. It's interesting. They also showed off a new button below the home button, which we don't know what it is. In the trailer, it was rendered with like, it's just completely blank. And in the leaks, it's supposed to be like this little C embedded on the button. So we really don't know what that thing's going to do. But I think overall, my expectations are par with what they were planning to do. I just didn't expect them to say, well, here's another 2.5 months of waiting time.
Yeah.
I also think that it's really interesting because this trailer, while it did what it was supposed to do, there's a lot of media outlets that came out right after saying, hey, Nintendo's innovation and creativity is now dead and gone. Like, this was a thing I think from, I can't remember if it was Viz or I forget what popular media outlets were talking about this, but Eurogamer maybe, and I forgot maybe one other outlet. But I'm like, I don't really think so. Like they always find unique ways to innovate, and they don't have to constantly do it every generation. They've been so up and down over the last 2 decades that it
Yeah.
probably doesn't make sense for them to do something completely out of the blue and so random, so different from a predecessor that sold so
Yeah,
well.
and to that point, I think a lot of times when people think of innovation, they think of a revolution, right? But it doesn't have to be a revolution always. You can just have an evolution, right?
Right.
And the thing is, who wants a Switch 2 that's so radically different than the Switch that you're not going to be able to enjoy all the things you love about the Switch? To me, I feel like the Switch is a culmination of like 20, 30 years of just progress when it comes to Nintendo. It's
Yeah.
just an amalgamation of all their ideas put together. And to me, we'll see what happens. But if the promise of the Switch 2, you have a little bit of new functionality with the optical sensors, we'll see what happens. But for me, if I'm getting no more Joy-Con drift, I'm
Yeah.
getting I'm getting better graphics and potentially using AI upscaling to be able to actually run games that usually miss to Switch and normally go to Xbox and Sony. I mean, what more could I want? And the hardware already looks good enough for me because the screen is bigger, it's slicker. So to me, I mean, I don't see myself wanting anything more from the Switch.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe some outlets are saying, oh, we want more, we want something to blow our minds because you want that excitement factor. But what would anyone want? I don't know if anyone can come up with something that's really unique that the Switch 2 seems like it's missing. Because to me, it feels like it's hitting all the check marks. Now, this is just kind of a small thing. I don't think this is a problem, but I just think it's kind of interesting. One of the big money makers for Nintendo has been kind of, honestly, the looks of your console and switching out the different color palettes of the Switch, right? With the different Joy-Cons. I wonder what they're planning on doing with the
Yeah.
Switch too, right? Because it's very muted colors, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, a part of me wants to think that probably they think the Joy Cons are more reliable now, right? I don't know, because if the whole color is black, right? Like maybe they're actually thinking, hey, these Joy Cons should last you the entire generation, right? But I wonder if now, instead of really having those differences in those color differences, instead of having them based off the Joy-Cons, you're just going to release more limited and special editions of their console.
Which I'd be fine with because they've done that so often during the DS era, 3DS era, maybe even like Game Boy Advance and stuff. And I really like those limited edition consoles. So I'm hoping that's what they do because we don't get that often now, even with Xbox and Sony. Really, you're
That's
just
true.
swapping out plates, you're putting on these little covers for the Xbox. And while it's all cool, I just like the actual care they take into giving you something super unique. So I
Yeah,
do
I
hope that
wonder.
Nintendo
I
does
wonder
that.
why that is. I wonder if like it's they just don't sell well. I
Yeah.
remember like the old school Halo, Gears consoles. Like those are pretty sick.
Yeah, and maybe they don't think the juice is worth the squeeze anymore. But honestly, what Microsoft does well, just as a side tangent, is like they have that unique Xbox lab where they can create custom controllers. So hopefully these manufacturers one day say we'll start to bring that back to the consoles. But I think with prices just constantly blowing up in inflation, it maybe doesn't make sense to do that right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a small subset of people who have the finances and who like gaming as a hobby enough that they really are going to put that extra time and money and effort into really customizing their consoles or switching out. Like, oh, I have this Switch when I want to switch it out for the Zelda version.
Which is unfortunate to some degree because when someone like Sony comes out and says, hey, for the 30th anniversary, we're creating this unique PS5 Pro with these unique PS1 colors, but we go, oh, we're only manufacturing 12,000 units. So, well, on eBay and on the secondhand market, they go for 5 times the price. So it's just unfortunate that like there's so many people that would love to have these unique consoles, but then they sell for so much outside the primary retailers. So it's just unfortunate that like everyone can't enjoy that. Like, why not? Why not create a large amount of these units? I get you're afraid that they might not sell, but in reality, I think that you have enough fans that they would cater to buying that.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it ends up being more beneficial to the fan base and less to like the actual manufacturer because then the collectors just go crazy and they
Yeah.
just hold on to those things. That's going to be so valuable for them like 5, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm guilty of doing that, but it's not often that I get those types of opportunities to buy them either. And I think
But not to interrupt you, but did your new PS5 Pro come in? I know you have the actual PS5 Pro, and now did you also get the special edition?
edition, and I haven't opened it from its box. I'm gonna keep it sealed, and maybe I'm not a scalper, but maybe one day in the future, if I need a little cash money, I might sell it for 5 or 10 times the price. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, probably like 10, 15 years from now, that thing is going to be worth a lot. Unless, Sony screws you over and just has a bunch of extra drops in the future. But
Maybe.
I don't
I don't see it.
anticipate
Yeah,
that.
I don't either. Well, and kind of going back to Nintendo Switch again, what used to excite me, and I may have said this before in other episodes, is hardware. Yeah, when I was younger, just understanding, like you said at the beginning, a revolution. What did they call the Wii? What was its code name? Nintendo Revolution, right? Because it was such a massive change from the GameCube. That doesn't excite me anymore. What excites me are the games. And honestly, in this past generation, Nintendo has knocked it out of the park by bringing old IP, old games, old series, old franchises, and modernizing them. And I'm just excited to see the new Mario Kart. I'm excited to see a new 3D Mario game. I'm excited to see how a Metroid Prime looks. Sorry, we had to take a quick break there, but from what I was saying earlier was, I'm excited for these new IPs and older franchises coming back, like a Metroid Prime Beyond, and obviously a new iteration to Pokemon Legends. And I'm just excited that with each new game that comes out from Nintendo, they're constantly, like you said, evolving their series. And I think that's something that Microsoft and Sony can learn from. They constantly drop their franchises if they're not commercial hits, and then they abandon them. And then when fans say we want these games to come back, they bring it back 15 years later. And it's unfortunate because if you have a consistent cadence of games, I know we complain a lot and say there was an era where we got Gears of War for 5 years straight and there was like 4 of them, or we got Halo too often. But in reality, we're kind of spoiled a bit. And I think I'd rather have multiple sequels to a game to continuously play them and let them just evolve smaller portions of the game, like the story, the gameplay mechanics, rather than going 10 years without a game in that franchise.
Yeah,
That's what Nintendo does so good.
I totally agree with you. I mean, even if you think about like movie franchises, like a lot of times people want that back to back. Like you want that Batman trilogy, right? Like you want like the Avengers Endgame 1 and 2 back in, back to back, because our attention is going to be divided by so many things, right? And it's hard to feel like really immersed in a world, right? If it's so spaced out. Like I think one of the reasons why Harry Potter has been so absolutely successful is J.K. Rowling just kept hitting those books year after year after year after year, and then the movies are coming out year after year after year. Can you imagine if the 7 Harry Potter movies took 20 years to come out in theaters? You're not going to be able to sustain that same level of hype, because now when people reflect back on that time period, it just feels like Harry Potter was the thing for those 7 years, because every year that's what we were looking forward to. Even if you think about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, when that came out, those movies were just back to back to back. And I totally agree with you. This is one thing I've been really critical of, especially Sony. I miss a lot of these old franchises, and so that's one part of it. But the other part of the equation is it's just too lengthy. I think I was hearing some other podcasts, and they were talking about even Final Fantasy VII. I mean, when people were so hyped about the Final Fantasy remake, right? And when we first got we heard about that, it seemed like that was game over. That was the mic drop moment. And how could you get better than this? And now that we're into the second game, waiting for the third one, I feel like a lot of that enthusiasm has started to die down a bit. Now, don't get me wrong, people still absolutely love Final Fantasy VII. I'm really looking forward to the end of the trilogy. But if they're taking 4 or 5 years for each of these games to come out, and they're going from PS4 to PS5 to PS6, by the time you have your initial announcement of the game to the culmination of the trilogy, which is really just the culmination of the one game, that's like 13 years,
Yeah.
right? And, this is not just a Final Fantasy problem, right? Look at how long it's taken for us to get sequels to other games as well, right? Like, look, God of War used to often be a trilogy. Now it was 2 games that were so spaced out. Look at Horizon. How long is it going to take Horizon to make its third game, right? Because they're building that franchise up to be a trilogy as well. So, I miss those days of, having, sequel back to back or trilogy back to back that really just kind of culminates the story. And I wonder if this is one thing I speculate from the Sony perspective, if they're really kind of going to break away from that trilogy format, right? You notice God of War was 1 and 2, right? Last of Us 1 and 2, and then in a way, like now sometimes you have sequels to games that are like spiritual successors. You went from Killzone 1, 2, and 3 to then Killzone Shadowfall, right? I wonder if Sony realizes that, and they realize like we can't put out these trilogies that get done in 4 or 5 years. We can't make people wait for a trilogy over 10 years. We got to do something different.
Yeah, it's a good point to bring up. And again, I feel like we have talked about this before. It doesn't really feel like we're really 5 years into the current generation of consoles.
Oh yeah.
And if you think about it, we're probably 2 years away from brand new hardware from both Sony and Xbox, and we might even be 1 year away from new hardware from Xbox.
I really think Microsoft's going to release their console
Yeah, in
in
2026.
2026. And I know that's
And
something we want to talk about more, but
yeah,
yeah, that means that we're near the end of the
yeah,
generation.
and it doesn't even feel like it's started. Like we got a couple of good brand new games that came out this generation, but we didn't get sequels to them, like you
Yeah.
said.
And even the games that came out, like, to me, Sony has been releasing amazing exclusives, right? Even though I'm an Xbox fanboy, I have to give it up to the Sony exclusives. But think about it, like a lot of those seem like leftovers from the last generation. They seem like games that didn't hit the PS4, so now they're PS4, PS5.
Mhm.
Last of Us, Ghost of Tsushima, God of War,
Yeah.
Ragnarok, Horizon, Forbidden West. I don't think it's a surprise that they were cross generational. It's not just because it's a money making thing. I think it's because these were games that potentially should have came out on PS4,
Yeah.
but they couldn't. They came out on PS5. But what have been the real new IPs and new bangers for the new generation? You have Returnal, right? You have some new IPs or Helldivers too, but they don't fill that same niche that we used to get. They're more like one-offs or more niche games and end up being massive successes. These really narrative drawn trilogies that you're able to experience in one generation.
So I think that's where what I would like to see, because to maybe potentially combat this issue, because again, the scope of games have grown so substantially. I do think instead of doing back-to-back sequels now, it makes more sense to put out a game and then do a spin-off of that game. And one example I can give of that is Uncharted 4. After they did that, they didn't really release just DLC. It was a side spin-off about two characters from the game, and that was like Uncharted 4.5, you know?
Yeah.
And I think you have to start doing that to not, you don't have to constantly evolve the games. And I think these developers are so ambitious when they say we want to make a sequel, it has to be so completely different than the prior iteration. You don't have to do that. So I think to maybe combat that, you make a smaller team that puts off a $40 or $30 side game for characters within the lore and say, look, we're going to give you more of it within 2 years of the original release.
So any franchise do you think would be good for that right now? Because I can think of one off the top of my head. I think God of War is right for that, right?
I do.
I can totally see God of War Atreus.
Yeah, and that would be like, hey, we give you 2 year development cycle. Maybe this kid has grown up now, and we already introduced him his combat scenarios within God of War Ragnarok. We can expand on that.
You can share assets. You can share the
yeah.
development pipeline, and I imagine I mean, you would know this about this more than I would, but most people say games come together like near the end, and so I mean, it might even make sense to pivot a part of your team away from polishing into, using, those same assets to start creating.
Exactly.
And, I kind of feel like Microsoft does that with their DLCs because they have this model with Bethesda. It's like, you get the game, but you can pay a little extra to get it early and get the next year expansion. And so Indiana Jones has that, Starfield has that. I bet you Doom is going to have
has already
that
announced they're having
because
DLC.
as they're probably polishing the game,
they're already
working on the DLC, which is almost like, if done right, it's supposed to be a DLC that's a little bigger than a DLC. I feel like Shattered Space was not it, but I would think Indiana Jones would be it, and I'm really, optimistic about possible Doom DLC in the future. Not to get ahead of ourselves, because it has done an amazing job with DLC in the past.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But speaking of kind of like some of these topics, I want to transition it a little bit because we're already getting into it. Is games taking so long to develop, and sometimes they're a hit, and sometimes they're a miss, right? And recently what just came out from Bloomberg as confirmed from Jason Schreier and now Sony is that there was 2 live service games in development by 2 of Sony's main studios, Sony Bend and Bluepoint, and both of them have been canceled now. And we now know what those were. Sony Bend's, we don't know exactly what Sony Bend was ringing about. It was an original new IP canceled. It was most likely some sort of shooter elements within this game. And then Bluepoint was working on a God of War spin-off live service game though, which, yes, am I looking for something like that? Maybe, but not the live service elements. And it's unfortunate that Jim Ryan, who was the previous CEO of Sony, left them in the state where he greenlit maybe 12 live service games. And he even announced 2 years ago that they had about 12 in development. And almost all of them have crumbled at this point. I think 9 of them have now been officially canceled. We only have Fairpoint Games. We have Bungie's next game. And then we have maybe one more. So this is very, very disappointing to hear. I think Bluepoint, honestly, is probably wasting their talent trying to take God of War assets to make a live service game. They've done this in the past with Ascension, and there was really no market or appetite for it. It doesn't matter that the story is probably better now and it's more in tune with what the market wants. I don't think that was wise to use them to do that. I understand they worked on this game for 2 years, from 2020 to 2022, to help in the development of the game. but I just didn't really think it made sense to do that because especially when Bluepoint came out and said we were working on something potentially original, to me this doesn't seem original at all. And it was honestly, I think it's a clusterfuck right now at Sony. And I think with Concord doing as bad as it did, I think they have to go back to the drawing board. And it sucks because now we might not see another Bluepoint game until PS6, and we might not see Sony then even survive till the next
Yeah.
generation.
I'd even put two and two together. And yeah, I guess both of these are canceled back to back. The disaster that was Concord, right? So to me, it can't be a coincidence, right? This seems to me a massive righting of the ship. I mean, they definitely did amazing with Helldivers, right? I don't think anyone expected Helldivers to do
Not at all.
that well, and I think Helldivers is the exception, right? It's
Yeah.
not the rule, and it's going to be hard to be able to make those successes again and again. And, to me, I'm really happy you brought this up because I think everyone always grills Microsoft Online when they make these poor decisions that end up hurting gamers in the long term, right? How much have we been roasting them for Scalebound, right? Just destroying them for that. And for me, I know you finally beat Hi-Fi Rush, but I absolutely loved that game from the get-go, and it hurt so bad when Tango got canceled too. But I don't feel like we hold Sony to the same standard because we get so happy from their first party successes that we just kind of excuse them for so many other things. To me, and I know I'm probably in the minority for this, I loved Order 1886. That was one of my favorite games of the last generation, and it had its problems. Yeah, it had kind of the QTEs and the cutscenes and all those type of things, and it was linear. But I feel like the reason that game did so bad was because expectations were so different at the time. I remember in those early years, Sony was kind of suffering from a lot of the same, the vitriol that you see Microsoft suffering for because everyone was saying, Sony, when is your game coming? When is your big game coming? Right. And, the only thing that was kind of there that people were looking forward to at the time was Order 1886. Right. And so when, what they wanted was essentially an Uncharted and they wanted a game of that caliber and it just didn't come through for them. And so I think that game just got destroyed. And then when Uncharted 4 came out, and then you had some of the other successes, people weren't just holding up every next release to such an insane standard or expectations because they were satisfied. And to me, Ready at Dawn was such a successful studio and they had so much promise. And it's so rare for people to do new IPs well. And even if Order 1886 had its problems, how often do we get something that's set in the Victorian era that's actually interesting, with interesting characters, interesting world building, with werewolves and vampires and things like that? You never see that stuff, right? And so to me, that was an opportunity to look at what parts people didn't like of Order 1886 and make a much better Order 1887, right? Yeah. And that could have been a successful franchise, but what has Sony been doing with Sony Bend, right?
Well, it's the same. It's the same situation with Days Gone. Was it not commercially seen as an amazing game? Sure, it wasn't. It didn't review well, but it sold well.
It sold well,
and it's like they could have iterated on that and made a second game. I hate to generalize, but sequels normally do outperform their successors, right? In some fashion, whether it's narratively, gameplay wise. They like Uncharted 2 was definitively the best Uncharted
game. A lot of times
game.
it takes, people a little bit of time to refine their ideas, right? And like you have great ideas, but in practice they might not have worked out in the first game, and in the sequel you kind of make that happen, right? You make it work. And yeah, Sony has an amazing ability to cultivate things, but one might also argue that Sony only bets on sure promises, right? And so if the first game looks a little, a little shaky, they're going to axe it right away. They're not just going to axe the game, axe the whole studio, right? But if, Uncharted, the first Uncharted was pretty loved, but there were critics of that game too, and the gunplay wasn't the best, right? What if they had just axed that right there and then, right? But of course, Naughty Dog had built up a good reputation with their past releases. And then, to me, that was an 8 out of 10 game, 8.5 out of 10 game. And then Uncharted 2 came out and then it just completely, decimated people's expectations. So how do you know that the next game, like Days Gone 2 or Order 1887 couldn't have been that good, right? You didn't give them a chance. And so to me, that often ends up being Sony's strategy. And I love them for it because it does mean that we get a really high standard of games overall. But in a way, sometimes it does stifle creativity because creativity doesn't come out perfectly in its first opportunity always. Sometimes it takes another chance.
Well, so that's why I want to, this is why I want to say this. And I'm honestly being blunt. I am worried now about this ecosystem because if all we get in the next 3 to 4 years, let's say 3 years before the next generation of consoles come out, is Intergalactic, Death Stranding 2, and Ghost of Yotai. I'm going to be extremely disappointed with the PS5 era. And let's talk about a little bit more. Let's bring it back a bit. Ted Price, co-head or head of Insomniac Games, basically, and who basically ran the entire ship of releasing multiple games throughout multiple generations, just announced he's retiring in March. So on top of, Sony just confirmed that they're not going to shutter Sony Bend or Bluepoint, but you don't know what they're going to do next. You don't know if they're going to be surefire hits like you just said, because that's what they like to go with all of them. They don't have now an existing franchise to build off of. You have Ted Price, who literally released 3 to 4 games on PS5 and PS4 each. He's gone, and I can't say that I can trust anyone else within that studio. Yeah, we don't know who they are, but can they deliver the way he did? He helped manage that studio, deliver great quality games. So I am worried. And even if Sony Santa Monica does release their game by the end of the generation, again, it's potentially a new IP. We don't know if it's going to be a hit, right? So all this is massive risk.
Yeah.
What game am I actually excited for now? Nothing from Sony. I'll be honest with you. There's nothing I'm looking forward to.
I'm surprised that you're saying that, but for me, I've been saying that I'm a lot more excited for what's coming out from Xbox because they're more likely to take risks, right? And they don't always translate, right? Like we obviously know Redfall, but they are more likely to really explore different genres and things like that. And Sony is a little more cautious. I think for me, I'm probably overall more optimistic than you. And maybe this is because I'm basic, but I just love God of War, Last of Us so much that if I get anything new in the God of War, Last of Us world, I will be happy for the rest of PS5. That's just how much I love those franchises. But I can understand, I might, again, be in the minority there. I think especially when you compare this generation to the PS4, it does feel a little bit lacking to me. And it's not like Sony is not releasing bangers, right? In a sense, because when you look at OpenCritic or Metacritic, last year you could argue was one of the best years for Sony, right? They had Astrobot, they had Silent Hill, remake. They had a lot of games that scored well, probably sold kind of well too. But it's not filling that same niche that I used to get with the Infamouses and the Uncharted and the Resistance and the Killzone. Like, that really, was a certain type of AAA game that I'm really missing and back-to-back sequels. So I guess we'll see what happens. Sony hasn't really announced much for this year. I was just thinking about it, but we really don't have much of an idea of what 2025 is going to bring. So they're going to have to release a state of play probably soon. And I think maybe they just wanted Microsoft to fire off. And then they're going to probably have to come with something in February.
Yeah, so here's the thing. There's rumors that there's going to be a state of play in February, but PlayStation hasn't done an official showcase for over 2 years. And talking to their investors in the past couple of months, they're saying 2026 fiscal year going forward, they're going to be releasing big games. But it's hard for me to imagine that when you're still canceling games like this. If part of this was part of that plan, I don't see that happening now.
That's a good point. I remember I was following up on rumors, and from what I remember, like a year or two, they were saying that Bluepoint was working on something that was pretty cool, right? Yeah, and I think it was like potentially fantasy or stuff like that.
That's what the rumors
are. That sucks. That really sucks to not be able to see them do something that's not a remaster.
Yeah, and so I kind of want to pivot into this next topic here because, like you said just a couple minutes ago, that there's more to look forward to now with Xbox. Now, they're also going into uncharted territories. They're bringing some pre-existing franchises back, but they're bringing a lot of new IP into the fold. And honestly, because of how polished some of these games look and some of the ones that I've just played, I'm kind of excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts about Xbox. I've been thinking about them a lot. They've been running all through my mind for the last 24 hours.
Jesus.
So, it's really interesting, right? Like, I'm assuming all of you guys have, at least tuned into the showcase.
So, Xbox Direct, which happened January 23rd, which showcased a couple of games, which is what he's referring to.
Yeah. So, of course, we'll kind of fill you in on some of the details if you haven't, but to me, that was a banger.
It almost felt E3 like.
Right? Yeah.
It was a mini E3 in my opinion.
And I was just thinking it's not like they let off all of the big guns. Going into this, I was there were so many rumors about what we would see. People were thinking we're going to see Oblivion like a remake. They could have showed off Outer Worlds. They could have showed off Avowed again. They could have showed off Fable. But going in, what did we have? Clockworks game. We didn't even see that. Not to mention all of the other rumored projects whatever Bethesda Online is working on. Gears. We know nothing about that. There's so many potential bangers they could have showed off. Perfect Dark. And going into the show, what did we have from first party? We were like, okay, we have Doom, right? which we saw the trailer for last year, and that's going to show up. We have South of Midnight that people have had mixed feelings about going into this. And then other than that, we're like, well, what are they going to show up with? But I feel like this is going to be uh, a direct that's going to be remembered because I think in the broader lens, it's actually marking a pretty significant change in Microsoft's overall strategy, right? And the way they're implementing third parties. So I think one of the things I want to start off with about the show is Ninja Gaiden, right? And I did not realize this at the time, and I wonder if you did. I only realized this when I was watching other YouTube videos. The first thing they said was that this is an Xbox game publishing game.
Yeah, that's
And
surprising.
so actually they're saying online that this is a first party game. And so that makes you even question what is a first party Microsoft game.
Yeah,
And we've
it's
always thought of first party as being an
studios
exclusive to
own.
that console or a studio you're owning, right? But it seems like Microsoft is trying to rewrite that.
This is the true definition of probably a second party game. You
Yeah.
got two, like in this specific instance, you got Team Ninja and Koei Tecmo partnering up with Platinum Games, which was kind of shocking
Oh
because
yeah,
I think the last time they partnered up together, they made Metal Gear
Revengeance, right?
Revengeance,
Yeah.
which
People
was
like that
people
game.
love that game. But there's also rumors now that basically everyone from Platinum has left. Obviously, Hideki already left. Kamiya and so many other people through LinkedIn and stuff. So Platinum is a former shell of itself.
But hold on, I mean, do we know why they're leaving?
There's been rumors about mismanagement, about creativity being stifled, and games constantly flopping. They were working on a new Beautiful Joe game, which was rumored, and that never came to fruition. So,
And how recently has all this stuff been happening?
within the last year.
Because that's what I've been wondering about. Because I guess like I wasn't in the know, and I was like, okay, I guess Platinum Games is not cool anymore. Because I always thought Platinum Games was like the coolest thing, and I was trying to see like where is this coming from. And I was looking at their past releases, and it seems to me they're still been releasing bangers. 2023 they had Bayonetta 3, and then they had another Bayonetta Origins game or something like
They
that. And so all of those games have done well. People like them. I think the only recent game I can think of which was a massive failure was Babylon's Fall, which kind of a horrible idea to begin with, and I thought it was going to fail massively.
They've had other failures. They tried to make that TMNT game, and there was a couple of other things. They tried some other live service, games and stuff like that. But I think overall, when Kamiya left, and rumors coming out after that, it's pretty obvious that they don't have the same set of people. It's kind of similar to BioWare when so many people left and went on their own venture.
Yeah.
They had all the creative people leave. And I think they have just enough of a team to help on joint ventures like this. So I think honestly, Ninja Gaiden 4 having these two teams will still be a good game because Team Ninja is still there. They're heading the whole thing.
I mean, to me, again, I feel like my opinion might be different than the internet public at large. But if this is a game that's been in development for 4 years,
supposedly, and they started the journey 6 years ago.
Yeah, and over that course of time, objectively, Platinum has mostly been developing a lot of bangers. There might have been a few misses here and there, might have been for other reasons, but over the last couple of years, they've been releasing a bunch of bangers. And if we're near the end of the development cycle, as is for Ninja Gaiden 4,
might be in good shape.
Did they even really need those people there?
Yeah, potentially. That's why I'm saying I'm not super worried. I think that it's interesting at the end of the. So first of all, I want to say this: Xbox does a great job with these directs because they only focus on a couple teams at a time. And I think the problem with when I compare this to E3 was you would only show a trailer, you'd get hype, you wouldn't know who was really working on it and why.
There'd be no gameplay.
But and there would be no gameplay. But these directs show the developers; they get to tell their story. And I think seeing Team Ninja say this is the year of the Ninja. There's 3 Ninja Gaiden games coming out. One just shadow dropped with Ninja Gaiden Black 2. You got Ninja Gaiden 4 with you're gonna have dual protagonists within this game. And then you got this almost indie like Ninja Gaiden game coming out in the summer as well, which looks fantastic.
I mean, take note for the whole industry. This is how you revitalize a franchise. Yeah. And I feel like they just struck at the perfect point. And, again, I will say that I'm more of an Xbox fanboy, than other consoles. And actually going into this year, I was a little down. I was a little depressed. Intergalactic, show.
Should you say clinically?
Not there yet, but it is wintertime, so no, but I saw Intergalactic, and I know people are hating on that, but for me, I have to hand it off to the creativity. Whether that game hits or not, I feel like it's hard to keep coming up with new ideas after a certain point. And I was like, man, I got to give it up to Naughty Dog. Even if this doesn't hit, you guys come up with so many ideas. That's amazing. And I was like, why is it like Sony just keeps winning? And it's like I feel like in Microsoft, I'm not one of those people when I'm waiting for, this is the year, because I feel like, 2021, not 2022, but even 23 and 24, I've been enjoying my Xbox. But I felt like there was this negative cloud going into this year, especially with, we don't have console exclusives anymore. Everything's going to the PlayStation. I felt like Xbox fans weren't as hyped in the same way. And
Yeah. So what I'll say to this is, I think the reason why you're feeling this way is because they are still, and they used to be, direct competitors between all three of the big three manufacturers or OEMs of these games and these publishers. You don't see a high budget AAA game that comes out like a Last of Us from the Xbox side and say they delivered. And I think we thought Indiana Jones was going to be the start of that, and I understand maybe it failed on certain aspects, but I think the first game that will actually do it this year will be Fable. It's going to have a great
oh,
story. It's going to
I
look
get what you
great.
mean. It's like we use like the triple A word around, but I almost, it might be cliche, but I want to say like quadruple A, right? Like certain
Yeah,
games that just, the Grand Theft Autos, The Last of
yeah,
Us.
they
I
nail
would
on
even
every
argue
aspect.
even like the Tears of the Kingdom, like the games that are really getting close to that 10 out of 10,
Yeah,
right, across the board. Like those are really far and few between. And I think Microsoft has slowly, brought up their catalog from like sixes and sevens to eights to
yeah,
now we're hitting like nines, but we haven't really been getting
the 10.
consistent tens.
And I think Fable will be the first, or
I
maybe that's
hope
me being
so. I
optimistic,
am
but
so hyped for Fable. I
yeah,
think that might
I
be one of my most hyped
yeah.
games for the year.
And I don't look. I look at Doom Eternal. Right, this was another game that was talked about a little bit more in this direct. It looks good, but when I see these cutscenes, they said they're now going away from storytelling from the codexes to now having them in
Yeah, I thought
cutscenes.
that was interesting. I mean, I hope they have good writers
Yeah,
because
I do.
that's
I
not an
do.
easy
It's
transition.
not. But when you see the gameplay, the cutscenes don't look good. Sorry about that. Just took another break here, but from what I was talking about specifically was, even with Doom Eternal, or sorry, not Doom Eternal, Doom Dark Ages, and just kind of seeing how they transition, to more cutscenes for stories. Now it's just it doesn't. There's something there that's still missing. Like in gameplay looks amazing, but these cutscenes still don't look that good to me.
Well,
And I know the game is going to be very high quality, high output, but like even I don't know. There's something still missing, right? When I'm
yeah,
looking at it.
I get what you're saying. I feel like people think that it's just easy to, add on, like a good story and good acting and all those type of things. But really, it's like a whole different type of production, right? Like if you actually want to tell the story not through codex, but through like the game itself, right? Like you're not only going to have to make sure there's great voice actors, there's great cinematography. There's a lot of different variables you have to really nail. And if you haven't had a pedigree for doing that in the past, it's not as straightforward as it looks. Now, for me, I guess I also realize I'm a little biased and I love Doom as a franchise. So, I mean, I'm still incredibly hyped for it. And I guess the graphics look good to me. The cutscenes actually look fine to me. I didn't think they looked that bad. The one thing that looked a little bit odd to me when I saw that video was the whole idea of standing and fighting. Because for me, I've always thought of Doom as just, trying your best to survive and
Yeah.
running and gunning like crazy. But I trust those guys enough and I know they're going to deliver. And they've already exceeded my expectations so many times that I think I'm going to end up liking standing and fighting. I know there's been a lot of people who have been talking about Doom the Dark Ages and saying it didn't hit as high for them because they didn't like the whole stand and fight idea. But to me, Doom is so hard.
Yeah.
And so if you feel like it's too easy or, oh no, we're trying to make it more approachable so everyone can be included, crank that thing up to nightmare difficulty
Yeah.
and you will not feel like they're trying to, appeal to the masses. They're just trying to broaden.
The game became too complex,
Yeah.
especially with the controls. And I think it's okay that they're simplifying it by having three different buttons you're using to kind of now play to hit, shoot, or whatever, or throw. But I think
Yeah.
another good thing to that is like it also specifically mentioned they're axing the multiplayer component of the game this time, which I don't know how many people really touched. I highly doubt anyone did.
I tried the multiplayers for the previous games, and they just weren't it for me.
Yeah,
And so
it's
I would rather have all the resources be in single
dedicated to
player
single
than
player.
having like I'm not saying it was half baked because obviously they tried hard, but that multiplayer is probably never going to rise to the level of a Call of Duty
Yeah,
or
or
Gears of War, any
yeah,
of the or Killzone like big bangers. So just focus on your strengths, right?
yeah,
So I'm super hyped for Doom. And for me, I wanted to go back to Ninja Gaiden. And the reason, I love that so much is I feel like a lot of console gamers for Xbox, like a lot of the bread and butter, they felt kind of neglected, right? And so to me, like this was like a huge point saying that we know what you guys like,
right.
right? And man, so many old school Xbox gamers, myself included, have such fond memories of Ninja Gaiden
Yeah.
2, especially, or even Ninja Gaiden Black. on the original Xbox. That for me, this hit all the right notes. And when I saw the combo of Ninja Gaiden 4, Day One Game Pass, plus
Yeah.
Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, released today, Day One Game
What
Pass,
a
I was like, man, this is how you serve your console gamers, right? Because this is what the old school gamers want.
well, I think this is the type of title you want to shadow drop, not a Hi-Fi Rush, which is a brand new unknown IP. I think it's okay they did it, but then you get to a point where everyone's like, "Why did you shadow drop this and not
That's a good
like
point.
make people aware of it
I
prior because
mean,
they could have got more
I loved
marketing?"
Hi-Fi Rush, but I do wonder if that game would have done better if they didn't shadow
Yeah,
drop it. But a
potentially.
game like this, like a remake that's gonna then get people hyped up for the the eventual sequel that's also not just exclusively on Xbox, that's on other
Exactly.
platforms, so you're making a lot of money on the PlayStation. I feel like this
This
was
is the
just the way to
perfect.
go. And my understanding now of what first party means for Xbox is going to be games that are going to come out permanently on Game Pass.
So, do you think this will be permanent on
I
Game
think
Pass?
this is what I'm hearing from the talking online and the rumors, and so that's why they're saying it's first party because you don't have to worry about this
That would be
leaving.
great.
And I think the reason why I love this idea so much is because look, you have Xbox revitalizing old franchises, A, and B, also broadening the scope of what first party means. And it just hit me like we've been talking so much about look at the bangers Nintendo has, Sony has, Microsoft has, right? And how you get all these exclusives on the other consoles, but on Xbox it feels like everyone's enjoying. So why am I an Xbox gamer? But then, on one of the most recent podcasts that Phil Spencer was on, he was just talking about, hey, we want to focus on the quality of the games now.
Yeah.
And honestly, for as much as everyone wants to hate on Microsoft, if Microsoft is releasing 2 to 3 massive bangers that everybody loves every year, is anyone going to care if they're going on all the consoles? If you're
No,
getting Doom, Black Ops, Ninja Gaiden, and who
no,
knows
not
what
really.
else, and these are games that in the past would never be an exclusive. These are games that would have always been multi-plat. And if you're getting these again and again and again and they're hitting and delivering, eventually Microsoft is just going to consume all your energy and all your thought. And I think that's what Microsoft's trying to
Yeah,
do.
I think it's
Instead
fine.
of saying we want to be the best console manufacturer, we want to be the best HBO, they just want to be everything. They just want to own and dominate the whole market by catering to the hardcore, catering to the people who are kind of dipping their feet in,
Yeah.
the casuals, as people say.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at it with Ninja Gaiden Black 2, it's already in the top 10 bestsellers for Steam right
That's
now,
crazy.
already digitally. It's a $50 game. So even though it's on Game Pass, people are still willing to pay 50. And B, to what you just said, Phil Spencer just did an interview the other day with, I think, IGN, where he's like, look, guys, like, we love what we're doing with all these other ecosystems, with Nintendo, with Valve, with Sony. We want to put our games out as anywhere as much as possible whenever it makes sense to. And he said it's only going to keep increasing like in scope going forward. So they're not really like, I'm okay with the fact that if they get good games like this and they expand to all ecosystems, because it's no longer about console wars. To me it's like I want to be able to play my games now portably. So if that means it goes on Steam, then I want to then be able to access it on my ROG Ally or my Steam Deck. I don't want to be limited to this one box that I have to play in my house. Maybe when I travel or something, I want to be able to play it on the go or through the cloud, and that makes sense through my phone or my handheld portable
Yeah.
system.
And I know every gamer has different needs. And I think I told a story of the other day about like, one of my friends who used to be a big gamer, now he has kids and he's actually thinking about getting back into gaming. And he asked me, what should I get into? And I basically told him, if you want the HBO of gaming, get, Sony, get a PlayStation. But, if you want good games and you want to get a good package overall, like get Microsoft because, you'll get Game Pass. But now I'm thinking about it and I'm like, man, like, everyone wants to play Last of Us, everyone wants to play those games, but if people are jumping into the Xbox ecosystem and they're getting Doom, they're getting Call of Duty, they're getting Ninja Gaiden, they're getting these big,
Yeah.
what we would think third party, games, and they're getting them every year, I think that might be enough. I
And
think you might not
I,
miss those other games as
I
much.
agree with that actually. My only concern is with so many games coming out this year, we know something's probably going to slip into
Oh, yeah.
2026. But can Microsoft not keep this up every year? I've been saying this for the last 10 years. Can they keep this up? So when they did Halo, Gears, Forza, they couldn't keep it up consistently. And I'm worried that 2026, 27, 28, when they do these developer directs, are they going to have anything interesting to talk about anymore? Are they going to be able to do
Yeah.
big June showcases
So
anymore?
I think there's enough studios. I mean, God, if you just look at how many studios Microsoft has with Activision and Blizzard as well, like there's enough
That's
of
true.
those. But what Microsoft is doing well, and what I want to see if they can keep this up is how they're diversifying into their non-owned studios. And so you see the strategy where Microsoft is getting games like Clear Obscure, right? They're getting Lions of Peace. They're getting these games that are maybe going under the radar, but we actually know they're gems, and they are actually noticing that, capturing it, and putting it on their
That's part of
platform,
the
right?
curation.
And that's a part of the creation. But those are basically what we would consider a double A that's outperforming, right?
Well,
And I think Microsoft is continuing that trend, but now they're starting to pivot and they're starting to show that, hey, maybe we even have the resources and the means to go after your traditional triple A,
right.
Your multi-platform game and making it a new first-party Microsoft title, which mainly just means that it's always going to be on Game Pass.
Yeah, and look, Satya Nadella just came out 2 months ago saying during COVID, we had a very pivotal moment where we talked about, do we continue being a games publisher and a games hardware manufacturer anymore? And what they ultimately came down to was we either go all in or we're all out. It's not one foot in anymore. And they said we're going all in. And that's why they purchased Activision, which is why I'm fine that they're expanding all their games to other ecosystems. Like, it doesn't make sense.
They have to. And the thing is, like, and I know we've talked about this before too with like Halo and Gears and things like that. Like, I was always so hesitant on those going to other platforms and like feeling the pain of Halo on Sony and things like that. But I think what Microsoft wants is they just want to consume the discussion. And if like Halo is so big because it's on every platform, Gears is so big it's on every platform, Fable's so big it's on every platform. Then you got Fallout, then you get Call of Duty, then you got all this stuff. If you're just everywhere and everyone's talking about you all the time, you are going to be milking money. And that's what they want.
And to add to that, you're going to be more likely to then do those spin-offs that I was talking about. You're going to do more Halo ODSTs.
You can take your creative risks.
Yeah, take your creative. You can do Gears Judgment. You can then do Fable, whatever. So I think this is the smart move. I know people were shitting on it, but you can no longer look at this delineation in the last 10 years and say, look, I prefer one brand over another. It's more about just how you can access your games rather than I'm a pure fan of said platform.
Yeah.
So I think if you're an actual, like, legitimate fan of video games in general, it doesn't matter how you play. You're talking where you play it with what controller. You just need access to them.
Yeah.
And the barrier of entry needs to be low.
And I think that's one of the nice things. I mean, for us, like, we have the means and we love this stuff enough that we're going to be playing on every console everywhere. We're going to be trying to play all the big games because this is we love this, right?
Yeah.
It's like a huge hobby and passion of ours. And I understand that, like, especially when you're younger, right? Or maybe even if not, like, times are hard, like, you don't have as much disposable income or the means to, like, be on multiple consoles, right? But, again, it's getting harder and harder to get all these Sony games, to get all these Nintendo games, right? And if, for some people, then they do have to choose between, I'm only going to get the Sony games, I'm only going to get the Nintendo games, I'm only going to get the Microsoft games. At least this way, as much as we crap on Microsoft, you can, stick primarily with Sony or Nintendo and at least, play on your phone. It's not as great as playing on your TV, right? But at least it's something, right? And so because of that, like, you're able to make it work for multiple people. And it seems to me like it's a win-win scenario all around, except for, people like myself who always consider themselves like hardcore Xbox fanboys, right?
Yeah.
And we might feel kind of burnt, but I think with time, if we're just getting banger after banger, even if we feel burnt or we feel like Microsoft is leaving us behind, if the games we thought that would never come back, like Ninja Gaiden, right, for instance, if we're getting them again and again, I think we're going to get over it.
Yeah, so again, let's just be honest here, right? Gaming as a hobby is becoming more expensive than it ever has. There's been a report that there's rumors, I know, that within the gaming industry, people are hoping Take-Two prices GTA 6 at $100.
I find that unbelievable.
So that they can then raise their prices, right? And like I said before, you kind of have to have someone subsidize these games, not just purely for development's sake, but for people to purchase. Like, inflation has been rampant, right? So if I can get into a game by paying $15 a month and play 5 games and get my worths out of it, I'm going to then go to that ecosystem, right?
And also, kind of, this is a little bit tied in, but did you hear about what the price is for South of Midnight? This caught me by surprise. It's $39.99.
Wow. So, okay, interesting. I know, I hate to judge by this, but like normally the price indicates how big of a game.
Exactly, and like Hellblade 2 is $49.99, so I think they're already signaling to us that this is not going to be a massive game, right? But instead of trying to make South of Midnight something it's not, like, oh god, we got to make the God of War of Xbox, and trying to stretch that out and go beyond what you're
Yeah.
comfortable to justify a $69.99
Well,
price tag. You know what you are, you know what you're going to deliver,
mm.
and just price accordingly.
Also, this is another argument that's been made in the last several years was Game Pass killing and stifling creativity, because then you're putting a lot of shovelware and junk, and you're saying we're going to pay as very little as possible. So that means we're not going to have these great high fidelity games. And again, I think it can go both ways, but I do truly think now with Microsoft's strategy and how confident they are, they're actually promoting
Yeah.
creativity. And I think that's coming with Ninja
It all
Gaiden.
depends on like what you're doing with it, right? Like everyone had the same problems with streaming, but like there's good streaming and bad streaming.
Yeah.
Like Netflix has made so much shovelware for so long, but I think at a certain point they realize we can't just throw billions of dollars just because we have
It
them,
doesn't
just
just
to
fix your
populate
problem.
our television. Like we want to make sure we're getting quality. So now they're actually trying to pivot in other ways, and they're trying to curate like better stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so same thing with Game Pass to a certain extent. Like are Microsoft, are you going to use it to just throw a whole bunch of stuff on there so you say you have it, or are you actually going to try and make it compelling and like have more creativity and things like that? And we'll see how it pans out. I don't want to sound like we're glazing Microsoft too much. Obviously I'm super happy because of Ninja Gaiden 2. That's just me personally. But Phil Spencer, there was just a recent podcast I saw, and he was really saying we want to focus on the quality of your game, our games, right? And that's what I want to hear, and put it into action in real world, because in the end of the day, like that's what people want, and that's why Microsoft was struggling, because you really gotta just make those good games.
So here's the funny thing. So like, look, at a certain point, you have to look at it from a business aspect and say we need to make money off the games we output. And like you said, then you say how much risk do we take? And that's what Sony is doing. They're canceling their games and saying we need to make money. But what I'll say to that, and what maybe Microsoft did very wisely, is yes, to offset the loss of their current console hardware in some of the games they were outputting, they bought Activision. And yes, every quarter now, when they report that Activision's revenue is what's kind of keeping them in the green, that's okay, because if they can use that money to then funnel into these unique projects, I'm okay with that.
And that the price tag that they spent to buy Bethesda and Activision was ridiculous. And I think Activision was probably a bit more expensive than it really deserved to be. And I think that was a reflection of it being a publicly traded company. And so it's going to be hard to make up that 70 billion, that 75 billion, because what you're going to make $1 billion profit a year for 75 years to make it up, so that's going to be, that's going to be hard. But at the same time, if you look at Microsoft historically, these people have lost billions of dollars on things. Like, do you remember the Windows Phone or Zune or all these things? And so, Microsoft is being hard on Xbox because they want them to make up that $70 billion. But at the same time, $70 billion is not going to kill Microsoft, even if they had to just write it off, because they have so much money.
Well, that plus, like you said, keeps them part of the conversation. I don't think they've ever wanted to exit this industry, even if they've talked about it. It's part of their DNA. It's part of innovation, which is what we need more of, because as AI becomes more prevalent, right, in our lives, it's going to be harder and harder to find people coming up with more unique ideas. And I think Microsoft still says like we have an advantage there, something that Sony might not, because.
And actually, that's a good point you bring up, because if they're going to go in the handheld space and they have those connections with OpenAI and NVIDIA and AMD, and they have all this like console prowess, AI can be really useful for those handhelds to super scale.
Exactly.
And
so
super sample.
Like what Nintendo did perfectly was they partnered with NVIDIA. No one thought that would have been a good partnership, but you know what? It's probably going to work out for them in the long run. And I think with Microsoft's partnership with not only AMD but then OpenAI, they'll be able to come up with a unique portable console too. But I think Sony, I'm not sure. Again, they're talking. There's rumors that they're going to work on a handheld, and I don't know if it's going to come out as well.
I wonder what that's going to look like.
Yeah. So I just think that now let's talk about this. From the Xbox Direct, there was also Claire Obscure Expedition 33. Again, very unique because this was a studio of only 4 people for quite a while. They've been working on this game for 4 years. They you can see within the trailer, they beefed up. They had maybe more than 4 people now working on the game, but that's probably all they can afford. And for Microsoft, again, to kind of finally go out there and curate and say, what you have is really unique, and you've done this in a reasonable amount of time with very little people. Yeah. That's something we're willing to give you money for and subsidize.
And think about I don't know what deals they had and how much they financed with this or that, but just the marketing. I mean, automatically, Claire has been something that everyone is talking about now, right? And to make it like a game for a showcase and really show it off, that reach, everyone's hearing about it, everybody knows about it. And man, that game really
Well, this
surprised
yeah,
me. That looks amazing.
this latest trailer got me even more excited. The first teaser trailer was like interesting. This having that French spin on the
Oh yeah,
RPG take, and then for them having a world map, something that Final
yeah.
Fantasy VII
And
did.
the way they speak is so confident. Like this does not look like a rookie team, right? Like
Yeah,
even though like it seems like this is their first outing, like
yeah,
how confident that art director was in talking about what they're talking about. It doesn't even seem like they're
yeah,
cocky. It just seems like we love this.
yeah.
We're so passionate. We work so hard, and we just want to share it with you and help you guys.
Well, Microsoft even as far as they went as far as saying, "Hey, we're not going to gatekeep this to Game Pass. You can put this on the PS5 and PC," which is what they're doing. And yeah, could they have given them a big enough bag to say you're good to make one more game in the next 4 years? Sure, they could have done it. But instead, they're saying your reach can go up further to a bunch more people. And guess what? If this is a bigger hit than you thought, you'll be set for life
Yeah,
too. So like, I just like that Microsoft didn't gatekeep this
yeah.
on the Xbox
Yeah, that's
platform.
true. They totally could have, and I think this game is gonna hit like really well. Like, I mean, I'm hoping it's not gonna be a disappointment because you never know. But every indication I see for this game seems like something I'm gonna absolutely love. I miss those RPGs and things like that, and I remember I think I was listening to Mr. Manny's plays, and he was talking about how this reminds him of Lost Odyssey, and I was like, that's it right there. That's that niche I was missing that I realized that this game is hitting because that was a turn-based game. It was an RPG, right?
Mhm.
JRPG, and just beautiful world, interesting idea, all those type of things. But there was some like QTE like events, and it wasn't to the same extent because you couldn't just block all the damage. But man, I was like, I'm eating good right now because I got Ninja Gaiden 2 and a new one on the way. I basically have a game that fills that niche of Lost Odyssey,
Yeah,
and I'm so excited about all these things, and I'm getting a new Doom, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
this is not even what I thought would be the banger. Like I
yeah.
was expecting to be blown away by Fable. I was expecting to be blown away by, potentially even Avowed being around the
Yeah.
corner, right? Or like some huge reveal, like the online Bethesda game, and you know, with what I didn't think was like the greatest hand, like Microsoft spoke to me personally with the games I wanted, right?
Yeah.
And I'm so hyped.
The one thing that I'm skeptical about right now within the direct is South by Midnight. You brought up a little earlier.
I'm happy you brought that up, actually.
Yeah, it's weird because again, like they're going with this weird direction of using stop motion. It looks interesting. The combat looks fun and exciting, but as I've seen more and more of the gameplay, it looks a little slow and clunky.
I'm worried that this game is going to come out being one of those 7 games. And for me, I was thinking about the last year. I actually really like Flintlock. Like I think that's a game a lot of people kind of passed on. It was on Game Pass, so that's why I played it. I enjoyed it. Was it as great as the other things in the genre, like Lies of P or whatnot?
Mhm.
No, no. But it was satisfying. And to me, I do feel like this is coming in looking like more of a 7 or 8 out of 10 game. And I would be really happy to be wrong because I absolutely cannot say enough about the setting and the
Yeah, it
characters and how
looks
unique
interesting.
and cool that is.
Like, what do they call it? South Gothic?
Yeah, you never see that,
Yeah,
right?
it's so
And
interesting.
again, any game or piece of media I consume that can inspire me to create something myself, I'm going to put that high.
Yeah,
And I think this is probably going to get my mind thinking and
I think
make me
so
think
too.
about different things. But yeah, that gameplay, it doesn't look like it's there. The frame rate still looks kind of odd to me at
Yeah.
times. And so,
Well, I'm also wondering now that with the story and the world they've created, did they just not have enough time? They're like, we had to spend so much time optimizing this game that we had to make it much smaller in scope, and they had grander ideas. And they go, okay, it's a $40 game. If it does well, we might make a DLC. Like I could see this being that type of game where
yeah.
they're viewing it purely based on how it sells, rather than just saying, let's continue to make more content.
Yeah. Well, I feel like now that we're this far in gaming, like the people who are at the top of the pyramid for like certain genres, like it's so hard to get there. Like
Yeah,
how much money and work did it take to make the action of God of War or like, the system of Elden Ring as good as it is? And
yeah.
it's not like this is the first time those people did it, right?
No, it
And
took
so
multiple
like we're
hits.
always going to unfortunately compare games within the same genre, right? And even if you throw a ton of money, at teams, are they going to be able to do what other teams like God of War does? And
No.
we shouldn't expect that. And it's just unfortunate because after we have a game that pushes that markup so high, it's harder for anyone else to get up there. And not only do they have to get up there, but then they have to get past it because we want something that's an evolution beyond God of War or
Yeah.
Elden Ring or things like that. And so because of that, like I think that's partly why the combat just isn't hitting the same for me, and I feel like it'll be good, but good might just not be enough
Yeah.
anymore. You know, if this was 5 years ago, that combat system might have been perfect, right? But now there's been so much evolution. It's just good, just isn't good enough
Yeah,
sometimes.
exactly. Good sometimes isn't good enough. That's the best way to say it. But you know what's really funny now? Now, again, I have to keep saying this, and I hate to hit the nail on the head. Because I'm so much more into portable gaming, and because this will be on Game Pass and will be available through probably cloud streaming, this is the game that I'm going to be playing in bed every night for
Oh yeah,
30 minutes at a time on my ROG Ally, saying, you know what, I am going to finally start playing these types
yeah,
of
yeah.
games.
That's
Because,
awesome.
yeah, it's like great way to like decompress and say, fine, there wasn't so much depth to the game, but it allowed me to experience something new that
Yeah.
I wouldn't touch.
And the thing is, like, not every game has to, hit the same niche or the same bar. For me, if this game comes out, even if it gets sevens, across the board, if I play it and I fall in love with the setting, like I think I'm going to hear some awesome South Gothic fairy tales that are brand new to me. If I just get that, I'm gonna be happy with the game.
Yeah, I will be too.
I'm gonna feel like it's enough. People will probably complain about it online
I'm sure they
because
will.
that happens all the time.
It's an echo
But
chamber.
would I love to have a game where I'm like, oh man, this is Xbox's God of War? Of course, I would love that. But I don't need to have that because you can. It's okay to have variety.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also funny that, again, and I'm saying this, but to have a complementary device not manufactured by Xbox to allow me to want to play an Xbox games, it actually kind of makes me laugh that, like, it's
Yeah,
ironic. And that's why I think if other manufacturers are out there trying to, not like directly help them, but like supplement them, it's funny that Microsoft's saying, we want to do the same thing now, which is why I think some of these games, there's rumors right now that Doom Dark Ages might come out on the Switch 2 later this year. So that would be interesting to see that.
yeah, agreed. So, all right. So I think we're probably going to be wrapping up pretty soon. We mainly just wanted to talk about the Direct and Nintendo. So we're going to try and do these every 2 weeks. So we'll be coming in around February, and probably Avowed is going to be right around the corner. So that'll be something to look forward to. So Arjun, what kind of things are you looking forward to in the next couple of weeks, or what kind of things do you think you might be playing or watching?
Yeah, so definitely want to eventually start watching Severance season 2. I'm probably going to wait till binge watch it. So maybe March when all the episodes come out, they're releasing it on a weekly cadence. Besides that, I'm looking forward to Avowed for sure in February and Monster Hunter for the first time in a long time. I'm kind of skeptical of Avowed still a little bit based on even the latest previews, but I'm going to try it for at least 2 to 3 hours before we talk about it. And then ultimately, I was very excited for Assassin's Creed coming out in March, but with the latest previews, I just don't. I think my hype has dropped a little bit, so maybe we'll talk about that in the next month or
Yeah,
so.
yeah, sounds good. And for me, you've probably heard me say it a million times, but I love Ninja Gaiden, so I'm probably going to play a bunch of Ninja Gaiden, and I'm really looking forward to Avowed. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks everyone. Take care.